Good morning. You're listening to the BLAINESWORLD show, heard each Wednesday here on WPVM LP in Asheville, North Carolina. You can also listen online at WPVM.org and watch on WPVM's Facebook page. I'm your host, Blaine Greenfield, and I'm here in my downtown Zoom studio in Fairview, North Carolina. And each week we focus on the Asheville theater scene, as well as on positive news and information about people and organizations in both Western North Carolina and throughout the country. And toward that end, it's my pleasure to introduce Alan Muscat. Welcome aboard, Alan.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Okay. And Alan is CEO of No Taste Like Home. And as we're getting started here, Alan, you can feel free to wave to all your fans and friends in Facebook world. Okay, so, and that'll be good because they'll keep the motion going. And that's kind of an inside joke we have here. Alan Muscat is the founder of No Taste Like Home, the largest foraging tour company in the world. Based in Asheville, he has appeared in a variety of major media and is the author of Coming Home, Finding Our True Nature, and Lila, Finding More Than Mushrooms. When it comes to bringing out the fun in fun, I like that. When it comes to finding the fun in fungi, is that right? He's the champion. And so I guess I should ask you before we begin here, in talking about foraging, for the folks who don't know too much about foraging, including yours truly, what is foraging?
It's going out to find wild food that we haven't planted. So it may be in the woods, could be in your backyard. It could be a tree someone planted for looks that has fruit falling that they're not eating. So it's my mom called it scavenging when she first heard it. She didn't know the word foraging either, but it's what people did before stores.
Now, when did you get into foraging?
I started formally, I would say, after college, when I first got in the woods and first started getting into cooking and health food. And those two put together got me into foraging. But scavenging, I think I did long before that, just not food.
Well, so you grew up where?
In Miami.
So when you were in Miami, you weren't into foraging at that point in time, or did you know you were going to be a forager?
No, I didn't know that. No, and again, in Miami, I mean, we would pick up seashells, on the beach, and we'd pick up, free stuff that someone threw out, or go to a garage sale. We might pick avocados or mangoes from an abandoned tree. So that's probably the closest thing to what you'd consider foraging. I was doing back then.
Now, did you study this in college?
No, I studied ecology and philosophy.
Okay, well, the ecology is sort of somewhat related, I guess. Philosophy is a bit of a stretch. But how did you get into then foraging?
Well, because the philosophy that I was touched by was Taoism, Eastern philosophy, which is about getting back to nature. So it's not that much of a stretch to want to literally, go into nature and eat more natural food. And that influence, plus not having a job, added up to foraging.
And so when did you start thinking this is going to be a full-time business or start a company as a result?
Yeah, I think I sort of drifted it or fell into it by making it a lifestyle and not wanting a job. I started, harvest for restaurants, and soon after that to teach other people. I mean, before that, I was teaching people as well, other things. It seems like anything that I'm into, I like to talk about, and that's why I'm here.
Well, no, it's really cool. So you started teaching it. When did you decide to form a company that did this full time?
Yeah, well, I've been doing this for 30 years, but for full time, maybe 25 between teaching and selling. That has been my main income, maybe more than 20, because I was editing for a little while, freelance. And then the company that exists today with employees didn't start till, say, 10 or 15 years ago.
And I think that's when we first contacted you about being on a show. It took us a while to get us scheduled here, but that I saw that you were actually doing tours then. You'll take groups of people and you do foraging with them. What is it that you do?
Yeah, we take people out to eat, I like to say, and we forage. So they get a basket and a knife, and we gather mushrooms if they're there, but a lot of fruits, nuts, seeds, greens, roots in the winter if we need to. All year round, there's something to eat. And that's what I no longer gather to sell anymore. I only do tours for folks, which is the teaching really, but we make it more fun, more of a touristy thing.
Well, describe in a tour, because I haven't been on one yet, but it sounds like something I should check out, that we sign up and then what happens?
Yeah, well, we have two tours. One's an hour and a half and one's 3 hours. The one most people enjoy most is 3 hours because you actually have time to forage yourself. In the hour and a half, you meet edibles and you taste them, but we don't spread out with our baskets, to find stuff. We also don't do in the hour and a half what we do on the 3 hour at the end, which is cook up some of it and taste it. And then the rest of it you can take home or to one of 5 restaurants in Asheville that will prepare it into an appetizer for free.
Oh, really? Oh, is that cool? What
Yeah.
can I ask you, just give them a mention? What are the restaurants that do this?
Right. It has varied over the years and with COVID, but the marketplace has been there probably the longest with us. Rhubarb is with us. We're on hold with Benny on Eagle, but we've been cooking at the Grove Park at the restaurant called View. And finally, we are now at Bull and Beggar restaurant in West Asheville as well.
So how cool is that? So you actually collect the stuff and then
Yeah.
you get somebody cooks it for you.
Yeah.
The question I'll ask, and I'm sure other people wonder about it too, but so you collect stuff, how do you know what's edible versus what's not edible?
This is where the philosophy sort of came in for me. Philosophy, you have to be careful in teaching, but of course, everyone knows you got to be careful eating wild things.
Right.
But what I've come to realize is it's a prejudice of ours because we have to be careful driving, of course.
Point well taken.
And we really have to be careful even in a store. Like not everything in a store is edible, but we're familiar with them. If you restrict it to vegetables, sure, like pretty much everything in the vegetable aisle is edible, but still telling the difference between, say, cabbage and iceberg lettuce could be really difficult to someone who is not familiar with them. But there's nothing out there in the wild any harder to tell apart than those two vegetables, which for most of us is easy, just from habit. So sure, it's dangerous to jump into the wild and think you can tell, an edible mushroom from a poisonous one, one day into this. But if I threw you into a car without any training, it'd be dangerous too. But once you grow up, if you were to grow up with these things, just like you grew up with carrots and parsnips, like most of us, like it would be a no-brainer to tell the difference. It's not that hard.
You gave a good example there, because the one that people hear about, I guess, are mushrooms, that they're, quote, they're poisonous mushrooms. What is the difference between the two?
Mushrooms this is again, a myth. Mushrooms are no more dangerous.
Okay.
They're less dangerous than plants. The percentage of poisonous mushrooms is lower. We just have a fear of mushrooms. There's a cultural fear. Of course, we should be careful with either one because we have deadly plants and mushrooms in our area. We have the greatest variety in our area outside of the tropics, possibly in the world. First or second, certainly in the Western Hemisphere, we're in the top 2. So there isn't a big difference with mushrooms, honestly. If you grow up with either plants or mushrooms, it's not difficult.
Now, you're talking about as you grow up. As a kid, were you into vegetables, in eating vegetables?
No, I wouldn't say so. I was into Burger King.
No, because same thing too. I'm listening that I was a kid. I wasn't into that, too much, and I'm not as much a vegetable lover as I should be. But that's probably something you have to work with, I guess, kids and adults too. How do you shift from having processed foods versus natural foods? Is that a tough thing to get people to do?
Well, it certainly is, and the surprising thing is that foraging can help tremendously because adults, pretty much can force themselves to do what's good for them, at least for a while. But foraging is fun at any age. And what you see children do is they will eat vegetables or mushrooms that they found that they would never eat if you put them on a plate, yeah, in front of them. I've seen it over and over again when they're invested in it. People who grow vegetables, they have these gardening at school programs. The kids will eat those because they have ownership of them. It's not imposed on them.
Well, from your standpoint, it must be fun probably to take, and I assume you take kids with you on the tours, and do they have a fun time as well?
Yeah, they're natural foragers. I mean, most cultures before stores, again, like the kids are the ones who forage, and it's like an Easter egg hunt or a treasure hunt. Yeah, sure, they have a great time. They don't want to sit and be lectured to, either in school or outside. So often they're just running off. But they're hearing, if they're within earshot, it's amazing what they remember when they don't look like they're paying attention. Yeah.
And so I guess when you take kids, it's a tremendous learning experience, not only for the kids, but probably for the parents as well. Do you find any of them continue with this after they've had this tour with you or read some of your stuff?
A few. It's a very small percentage because most of our people, being a tourist attraction, basically, don't come into it with a prior intention to learn to forage. It's just an interesting thing to do. Maybe it sounds like a survival show on TV. A lot of people say, I don't plan to start foraging, but it's really nice to know that I could. It's empowering just to have the idea to see that, if push came to shove, like I could survive. It would not be hard.
Well, so when somebody goes for a tour, describe what happens. And we meet you someplace, and then where do you go?
We have a number of locations depending on the season. And so we might go anywhere 20 to 45 minutes out of town. Lately, we're going to private places mostly. There's a couple, botanical gardens. Sometimes it's just someone who has, 100 or 200 acres. Even just 5 acres can be enough. And we walk around in 3 hours, for most of it. The last half hour, we cook up what we found. In the middle, we might spread stuff on a blanket that everyone found, mix and match, like separate what's edible from what isn't, do a little teaching. And that's 3 hours flies by that way.
Now, is this legal to do? Can you just go anywhere and start foraging?
No, I mean, this is the US, there are countries with, I don't know the translation, mostly Northern Europe, where it is legal by law to be able to forage on anybody's land as long as you stay away from their house. It's not trespassing. But here, of course, it is. And most people can go to national forest and, there are permits that you can buy like 3 weeks for $20 or something. And on the Parkway and in the Smokies, you can actually forage limited amounts, something like a pound per species per person per day, something like that, of berries or mushrooms. So even in a national park, some of them, they recognize that foraging does not hurt the woods, certainly not mushrooms or berries that are like, picking apples doesn't hurt the tree. You see? So it is allowed.
So tell also about places you've foraged. So you obviously in the Asheville area, but have you foraged elsewhere?
Yeah, I was in Spain and last September, and I ran into people picking mushrooms. They love them there, like that tasted different than here. Ones that we wouldn't think twice to eat here were actually delicious when I got some. So Europe is much bigger. It's easy to run into folks. I'm in Florida at the moment, and here I'm learning things. I've learned half a dozen things that I didn't know. So I mostly know my area. I've tried a little foraging in Cuba also, which is where my family is from. But I know to go with someone, because even if it looks like something familiar, I'm in a different place and I have to be careful. That's what I tell people to do.
What about different seasons? In other words, I forgot, so you're in Florida now, but in terms of, say, the Asheville area, are there best times to be doing this?
we go out all year because there's always at least 15 things, maybe 30 that are edible, even in winter, that we can show people. And we only have time to cover a dozen, really, at most. Otherwise, it would actually be overwhelming to learn that many. But the most variety of plants, if I had to say this, would be in the spring coming up now, like March, April. The most variety of mushrooms would be August, September. But there are some things that are in odd seasons. We have morels coming up in April, which is a very popular mushroom. You know, in the fall, we have a lot of fruits, so that you wouldn't have in the spring. You know, wild fruits like pawpaws, some people have heard of, and others not. And again, later into winter, you would start to get, you know, nuts and roots and seeds. That's the time to get those. So
Now,
every month has something interesting.
now there's something in the Asheville area. You're right now in Florida, but there's something you can do. Like right now, we've kind of had a mild winter, but you can be doing this all throughout the year.
Yeah, we just had a tour, you know, on Sunday, and we have one every week at least, even as long as, you know, the weather holds up. I mean, there are fresh salad greens under the snow. You know, you clear it away, chickweed will survive snow and be a great lettuce. Most people would be hunting, you know, in the late fall or early spring, and that supplements what you're picking. But there are mushrooms out all winter, you know, some of them on trees. There's one that tastes like you make it into coffee, and it's like it has a mocha flavor. It's really, in winter would be the easiest time to find it. That's an interesting anomaly.
Now, you, for example, I imagine could live off stuff you found through foraging. Can people do that, or do people do that? Actually live on what they find?
Well, you know, it has more to do with what you're used to than, you know, what's possible. And you know, the diet would be rather different. You know, your local fats, you know, and proteins, again, you'd probably want to involve animals, which not everyone would want. Um, and you know, there are these little wild potatoes that I like to eat, and you know, my girlfriend doesn't like those. She wants regular potatoes, so you have to be a little flexible. Um, could you survive on it? You know, I've not tried. That's not really the point for me. I mix it in. You know, it's integrative, you could say. Um, I would say half my diet, you know, roughly speaking, you know, is wild. It'd probably be more if my girlfriend actually enjoys wild foods more. Um, but greens and fruits are very easy to just eat wild. If you want specific things, that, you know, that's what the store is for. Like, you know, you won't get avocados here. You won't get wild, you know, I was going to say strawberries. There are wild strawberries, but you know, cantaloupe, you're not going to get that wild here.
What about having to you get the fruits or the vegetables? What about having to wash them? Or is that kind of a myth, or you don't really have to wash them?
I I worry more about washing off what comes from a store, you know. And people say, "Oh, what if a dog peed on it?" And I say, you know, pee will wash off, but GMOs don't wash off.
Good point.
You know, well, humans make things far more poisonous than are out there. If you forage in your yard, or you know, I would avoid the side of a road, but you know, there is more wild food in the city than there is in the woods, and there you would want to rinse things off, I would say.
So, like you said, when you do your tours, that people collect the food, do you then typically wash them off or before you prepare them?
No, typically it's not necessary. The places that we go, and you know, a lot of the antioxidants, which everyone has heard of, are on the outside where the oxygen is, and they are water soluble, like their acids, say like vitamin C. So when you wash your produce, you're washing off these antioxidants. Uh, I wash the things that have been handled by human beings, you know, not stuff that nobody has touched, you know, in nature. To me, like the word dirty is a misnomer. Like, if there's dirt and I don't want to grit my teeth, yeah, I'll rinse off dirt because of the mechanics of, you know, gravel, but not because of some bacteria. You don't get, you know, germs from, in fact, you get what's called beneficial soil organisms if you don't wash your food. It's like a
Well,
probiotic.
what about though also two other things you can do? What about like cooking it? In other words, so anything people collect foraging,
Hmm.
you said at the end of the trip or tour, they don't typically cook it unless they go to a restaurant, but anything they collect should be cooked or it's optional whether you want to cook it or not.
I mean, we cook things that are tough. We don't cook. I mean, now with COVID, I mean, we might be whatever we're going to feed people, we cook because of the COVID between humans. But um, there mushrooms, by sort of a given to cook them because they're generally indigestible raw. Some are toxic raw that are edible cooked. So there are exceptions, but most mushrooms, as a rule, you cook, and there are plants that would be poisonous raw. So it just depends. I wouldn't say in general that I would cook everything that's wild just because I'm afraid of, germs on it.
What about the film too? You've probably seen it. My wife has. I haven't. Was it Fabulous Fungi?
Hmm.
Have you seen it?
Uh-huh.
Do you recommend it?
Yeah, it's a nice introduction. There's a kind of a bit of self-promotion in it, I would say, if you can look past that. It's beautifully done, and they talked to me about being in it actually early on, uh, but I guess they filled up with folks, maybe, and I think there could have been more about like what can be learned by mycelium, which is what mushrooms grow from. It's sort of like nature's internet, and it really teaches us about our interdependence because plants, 90% of them at least, wouldn't survive without mushrooms because all plants, healthy woods or trees at least are connected and they share nutrients. So it's very fascinating, this sort of original, like universal healthcare that exists in the woods. And it would teach us something about, that we're not, we say we're all in this together so much now, especially with COVID. Because if one tree gets sick in the woods, the others will actually send nutrients to it to help.
Interesting.
Yeah, even different species. And this is all underground. And so this is something like the movie. I think one person mentions it, but it would be nice to, this is where my philosophy comes in more. What we can learn from foraging is even more important than what we can put in our mouths.
Talking about putting stuff in our mouths, what's the strangest thing you've ever eaten?
Uh, yeah, well, um, recently, I don't know, Japanese beetles, recently. I mean, I had a roadkill raccoon recently. Bugs are, and animals freak people out more. There's a mushroom though that melts into this like black ink, and most books tell you have to eat it before it melts. But afterwards, the ink is even tastier. It's edible. It's just black and scary looking. Yeah.
Well, you're certainly, I'm not a very adventurous eater. Certainly, you seem to be a pretty adventurous eater. You'll try most anything.
Well, yeah, sometimes to a fault. I just gathered some sarsaparilla. People have heard of that as root beer, but
Right.
we call it greenbrier when it's just the plant. And I found the tips here, and I was eating quite a few. And I'm thinking, I picked them in a park. It's called that might actually be polluted. And I was so enthusiastic that here is another example where the plant is edible, but it could be sucking up toxins from, runoff, of which there's a lot here. So sometimes, sadly, foraging backfires.
But in your case, it didn't backfire, though. You were okay.
Uh, yeah, as far as I can tell, but chemical contamination is cumulative, like heavy metals. They don't have an acute symptomatic, reaction necessarily. So you have to be careful.
Talk about the fact also that you started writing about some of your experiences, I guess. And no, you said you had two books here. The first one was Coming Home. Was that the first one?
Right.
What got you to becoming an author?
Like I said, I like to talk about things. I like to explain myself, and especially today, you can't get more than 5 words in, right, before you have an argument. So I write, yeah. except on this show, thankfully.
I'm giving you 25. Go ahead.
Um, but I write about the meaning of life as I see it. I mean, in philosophy in college, I didn't get to do that. That's what mattered to me, which is why I liked Eastern better than Western philosophy. It was actually something useful. And like I said earlier, I think foraging can teach a lot and speak to a lot of the troubles we're seeing today. And so coming home is a critique asking, like, where did our problem start? Did it start when we stopped foraging, which is thousands of years ago? And my next book that I'm finishing now, the Leela one, also asks this question, like, what's the true difference between a forager and we are agriculturalists, that we're farmers. We eat what we don't necessarily grow it either, but we eat what's grown in farms. And that's a huge difference psychologically in whether you're eating what you might call Mother Nature's food or God's food or our own food. And that says a lot about whether you live in fear or live in trust, as far as I'm concerned.
So when you write, is that something you do every day, or do you have a discipline to that, or you just do it whenever you feel like it?
I wish. I think if I was disciplined, I'd have a real job and I wouldn't be a forager. But that's probably why I became one. I have ADHD and I get distracted by whatever's on the side of the road. So I'm an opportunivore. And that has its disadvantages of not getting to the place you wanted to get to on time because you stopped to forage stuff, or getting the book done that you promised, 3 years ago.
That's pretty cool, though. So, but you finished one whole book and you're finishing now a second. So you can finish it, I guess, when you want to. It's pretty good.
Mm-hmm.
Do you like, in terms of, so we talked about writing, do you like speaking in terms of running with groups or lecturing to groups? Do you enjoy that?
Yeah, and when I train my guides, I tell them, keep your mouth shut because don't be like me. I talk too much on a tour when it's an experience, but I'd much rather do this when I can talk about why and not just how, or let people do it. Like I said, I'm like a Gemini, and I guess I've always been into the reasons to do something, not just how do you do it.
That's interesting because I am too, and it seems as you're talking, not the same kinds of interests as you, but I find myself finding lots of interests, that they're just kind of out there. If people are interested in signing up for one of these tours, now these are primarily just out of the Asheville area?
Well, we'll travel, we have to charge travel expenses, but
Sure.
the regular tours that are scheduled are all in Asheville because we have our hands busy. We are full up. We sell out all through the season now, even
But,
more so with COVID.
wow, I like hearing that. That's good news. If folks want to find out more about either you or your tours, what's the best bet?
Well, the tours are at notastelikehome.org. No Taste Like Home is the name of the company. And if you just put in Foraging Asheville, we'll probably come up. In fact, we're probably the largest foraging tour company in the world at this point.
Okay, it's pretty cool.
For my philosophy, yeah. For my writing, it would be my name, alanmuscat.com.
Okay, and you spell Muscat,
ALA. Yeah.
and that's MUSKAT. Okay. Anyway, I'd like to thank you, Alan, for being my guest this first half hour on the BLAINESWORLD show, and certainly something that I should think about, and I guess everybody would be kind of a unique experience. I'm trying to think. I know a group of people would be interested in that. And it just sounds like it's a fun thing to do as well, is it? When you do it,
Yeah,
people.
yeah. I think hopefully I call it No Taste Like Home. I hope people will feel more at home in nature. And I think that's the fun of it.
Okay. Well, I'd like to thank you for being my guest this first half hour on the BLAINESWORLD show. And as you kind of fade out of the picture here, I'll bring in my second guest. But hopefully I'll get to meet you sometime in the future. Alan, be well. Okay, thanks again. So I'm going to get rid of Alan, and we welcome our second guest. And as we welcome you, Brad, good to see you. Let me just mention to our listening audience that you're listening to WPVM, and WPVM's mission is to foster community through programming that cultivates dialogue to inform and entertain. The station provides a medium for artists, business, community leaders, and nonprofits to share their voice on live radio. Listeners are invited to help support WPVM's efforts by making a tax-deductible contribution. You can do so by going to the website, wpvmfm.org, and looking at the donate option on the upper right side. My second guest tonight is Brad Basch, and welcome aboard, Brad.
Hi, how you doing?
Okay, I'm doing well, thanks. And by the way, as we get started here, you can wave to all your friends in Facebook world. So this is the first time that Brad's been on Facebook Live, so glad you could join us, and being on the radio as well. Dr. Brad Basch wants to serve the greater Asheville community by providing the best possible care to those experiencing TMJ disorders. This passion is what inspired him to start the Jaw Therapist. I love the name of that, the business, the Jaw Therapist. And before I even ask what the Jaw Therapist is all about, let me just ask you in terms of your background, you grew up where?
I grew up in just outside of Orlando, Florida.
Okay. And when you were growing up outside Orlando, Florida as a kid, did you always know you wanted to be a physical therapist?
I started to think about that in high school. So I was fortunate. A lot of people don't realize or know what they want to do until much later. But in high school, I had anatomy and physiology classes, and I just became fascinated by it. And from there, I just had some experiences with shadowing physical therapists. And I just thought it was just like, it just blew my mind that you can use the body to help heal itself by exercising or doing different kinds of things. You can really treat yourself without using some outside input.
No, what's really cool about what you did, and very unusual, is you identified this as a fairly early age, but you did something else you just mentioned, which I think is something people should consider, and that's it, to spend some time, like I said, shadowing, or spend some time with people in fields you'd like to check into. And that's a really good thing. I think everybody should be doing, so that helped you. And so physical therapist, you were shadowing physical therapist when you were that age?
Yeah, towards the end of high school and then early college, I started to spend time in a couple of physical therapy clinics, just trying to understand what it is. And I didn't really have much personal experience myself, so I wanted to really get in there and just know what it is. And spent hundreds of hours just watching.
Talk about the process, though. It's very interesting in terms of the very first physical therapist. Do you remember who that was, who you shadowed?
Yeah, I do remember him.
Give him a shout out, because we'll mention him and then we'll send them a copy of the tape. Who was it?
I don't remember his last name. His first name is Darren.
Okay, Darren. It's too bad. Or if we can dig him up and send him a copy of the tape. But it's interesting that he had an impact on your life, because had it not been a good experience, you wouldn't have enjoyed it. Talking about for other people to do the same kind of thing, how did you find him, or what made you choose this guy, Darren?
Had a family friend that was just working as the front desk of that clinic, and she just found out that I was interested in physical therapy, and she said, "Oh, why don't you come and just hang out and just check it out?" So she got me in touch with Darren, and he was just like, "Yeah, come on over." Just had to sign a couple things related to like HIPAA, and which is medical privacy, and from there, I just started to hang out there a few days a week for probably like 4 to 6 hours at a time, and just as a college student, you can't really do anything, so it's just a matter of just watching and occasionally asking questions and just really learning by observation.
So you then did some of these shadowing experiences, which were really great, and then you then studied some of these subjects in college. When did you officially decide to become a physical therapist? Like in college or after you graduated college? Early college. I was set on it from the beginning, and just everything I was taking in college was in preparation to go to physical therapy school, because it is an extra program on top of your bachelor's degree. It's a 3-year full-time doctoral program. So right off the bat, I was just focused on that. That was my goal, was to get in. And it's funny, when you did that, I think it's really to your credit, because I found the same kind of thing, that once you decide something, it makes learning in school and college the whole bit so much easier and more enjoyable because you're going in a direction, and that was really unusual that you decided that, fairly early. So you then went for 3 years of training after college, and then you were, at that point in time, you were a physical therapist?
Yeah. So after those 3 years, you just hit the ground running. The last year of physical therapy school, you are, at least for my program, we were in our clinical rotations. So we were in clinics full time, treating patients, learning from mentors and clinical instructors or other physical therapists, and really just getting our feet wet in a controlled and safer manner, because we do have that supervision and guidance. But as soon as you're out the door, I mean, you get your first position and you get in front of a patient and they look at you like you're the expert, even though inside, of course, you think differently, but you just hit the ground running.
Now, when did you come to the Asheville area? You said 7 years ago.
About 7 years ago.
And you were practicing, you were a physical therapist at that point in time?
Yeah.
And now, were you then working for other people, or did you have your own business at that point in time?
I was working for a private practice. So I just recently started, a couple months ago, started my own practice, started the jaw therapist.
Okay, well, let's talk about that, because that's really, I think, kind of interesting that not only did you become a physical therapist, that's what brought me to your attention through a mutual friend of ours, that there are lots of physical therapists. But as far as I know, are you the only jaw therapist in Nashville?
So there are other people that work with people that have issues with their jaw, but I am the first clinic that is focused solely on the management of these types of things. So there's a large percentage of the population, probably like 15 to 20% of people have issues related to their jaw and face that they just don't really consider, or they think about, or they go to their dentist or an ENT and are like, this is the issue I'm having. And oftentimes those providers, they know what they know, but they're not necessarily educated in the management of all the time pain of the jaw or certain limitations that people might have. And physical therapy and physical therapists that specialize in this can really fill that gap and make that difference. So I saw that as a need, not just here, but just in nationwide. It's just an underserved population.
We'll talk about then the need for folks, and I guess showing my lack of knowledge about the subject. I know TMJ, the term, lots of people have heard the term TMJ, but so starting from the basics, what is TMJ? And we'll talk about where you go with it.
So TMJ is your temporomandibular joint. It's a big name, so TMJ is a lot nicer.
Right.
So that's the hinge on both sides of your jaw. That is the joint that allows your jaw to open and close. It's that hinge. It's just in front of your ears. You can stick your fingers just in front of your ears, and as you open and close your mouth, you can sort of feel a little bit of like a rolling kind of movement in front of it.
And so a lot of people, so everybody has that joint, but I know a good number of people have problems with that, including my wife. What makes people have problems with that?
So it's not typically like what people would think is like an acute kind of trauma. Like everyone, for the most part, at some point in their life has sprained their ankle. So you walk along, you roll your ankle, boom, your ankle hurts. You know what happened. Whereas the jaw, that can happen, but it's not very common that people have like an acute kind of issue. And you can maybe think about this in terms of your wife's situation. It's usually something that builds up gradually over time. And at one day, they're just like, I think my jaw is a little sore. Or it starts to make a little noise, or it's just like, oh, it feels a little funny to open my mouth. And it goes away. They don't think about it. But then maybe like a few months later, it's like it's back again. And it just, over time, it just starts to become more of an ever-present kind of issue. So it's a lot of like just little factors that build up over time.
And so when do you know it's time to then seek the jaw therapist?
So if you're feeling like you have any issues that's related to your jaw, whether it's painful or you're restricted in your ability to open your mouth, or if it bothers you to chew or you don't feel like you can chew properly, there's a lot of variety of issues. Like some people just have difficulty with singing, for instance, or talking. Their jaw starts to get sore, they get uncomfortable. But there's also other issues that are related to the TMJ, like that we don't really think about as an issue related to your jaw, but like headaches, for instance. It's sort of just this complex of your jaw and your neck, your shoulders, your upper back. They all sort of relate and work together. So it's an easier name to call it like TMD. It's temporomandibular joint disorders. So it's like just a family of things that encompasses the jaw as well as the neck and headaches.
Well, listen to you. You're giving me an idea that if I saw you, for example, then I could start a singing career. You know, you mentioned that if they have. So I don't sing now, but you know,
you've got to come with the talent. I can just help you along the way.
Okay, so it's not something you don't also do singing lessons on the side.
No, you don't want that from me.
Okay, but talk about then, because again, I never thought of, and I guess a lot of people never thought of the fact that physical therapists. You know, you think about physical therapists for lots of things, and I've seen them, but never for the jaw. What does a physical therapist, the jaw therapist, do for somebody who has a difficulty with some of these issues?
So the physical therapists, just in general, they're movement experts. So if something in your body, whether it's the muscles, the joints, the nerves, if they are not moving well, whether that's pain or just a limitation, that's where the physical therapists come in, because they're the experts on managing that kind of situation. So more specifically, if we're looking at like the treatment and what that consists of, every individual is different. So it's hard to give like this is the plan exactly what's going to happen, because every person, their symptoms are different, their presentation's different, their goals and what they want to achieve out of this is different. So it's always tailored to them, the individual. But typically my treatment plan and philosophy, based on what we find, is it utilizes a lot of hands-on work initially, with the intention of trying to get muscles to calm down, get joints moving better, and then following that up with like specific focused exercises that are intended to train the muscles to keep it that way, and to really reteach you how to move. So I think of like a good analogy to this is thinking about if the muscles are people. If some muscles are overworking, others are underworking. So everybody can put in a little bit of overtime here and there. They deal with it. They get a little extra pay. It's okay. It doesn't ruin them. But if you're having to work overtime every single day for long periods of time, months, years, you just say enough's enough and you're going to quit. You're just not going to do it anymore. So that's in relation to your muscles, that certain muscle groups might be overworking and they just consistently work and work and work. And then they sort of fatigue and they say, no, thanks, I'm done. So
but it's interesting as you're describing it, because I never thought of, and I guess most people never thought of, jaw muscles. You know what I mean? That you know, other kinds of muscles you can work and exercise. But are there actual exercises you've been doing to improve? And are there actual jaw muscles?
Yeah, there's a ton of muscles in your jaw, and there are specific exercises that are intended to wake up those underworking muscles and to get them up to speed to pick up the slack for those overworking ones. There are a lot of just like little funny movements that people initially think is awkward and goofy, but then they start to do them and they're like, oh, I can't actually do this. This is tricky.
Well, I'm thinking out loud here. I mean, so if I worked with you, I could have like bulging, you know, jaw muscles. You know,
you're gonna look like Popeye.
Well, I'll put you on the spot. Give me an example of I've never thought of that before. A jaw exercise.
So I think just an easy one that I usually give everyone right off the bat, because a lot of people have trouble with this. You're going to rest your tongue on the roof of your mouth. It's going to be just behind your front teeth. So you got your front teeth here. There's a little ridge behind your front teeth.
Should I want to do this as you're describing it?
Yeah, go for
Okay.
it.
Okay.
So you're not going to stick your tongue against your teeth, but just on that ridge.
Got it.
And keeping it there, you're going to just comfortably open your mouth.
People are going to see this. Yeah,
and you're going to hold it there for a few seconds and then close up. But you want to keep your tongue there the whole time.
that's interesting. And what does that do?
So that gets some smaller, deep muscles of your jaw that often turn off and don't do their job as well. It gets them to kick in and engage on both sides of your jaw. So some people, they might have popping or clicking in their jaw. Sometimes doing that exercise in itself, they might notice, oh, it smooths it out a little bit. It's because those muscles kick in, they engage, and they control that movement a little bit easier.
Is clicking an indication of a problem?
If it just clicking in itself isn't a problem unless it seems to interrupt something else. Like if somebody's just having noise in their jaw, if they can deal with it, it's okay. It's okay by me. It's okay by them. But if it starts to limit somebody's ability to chew or eat, I think that starts to become a bigger concern. That's where I want to say, hey, you should get some help.
I guess I'm blessed in that I've never had a problem or never thought I had a problem. But people have a problem. I didn't realize it as you're talking about it. It does become problematic even for them to eat. It bothers them or it hurts.
It can for some people. Some people can have a really unfortunate situation where their jaw the muscles of their jaw can sort of lock. And at that point, some people, they just cannot open their mouth more than just a teeny little bit. So it can restrict their ability to open their mouth to even get food in, let alone chew it.
It must be exciting for you working with people where you see, I guess, a before and after approach, that people come to you with a problem. And then when you've helped them, it must be kind of exciting.
Yeah, it is definitely exciting. I mean, I think that's the allure of any kind of healthcare profession, is trying to see an end to it. But I think it's more satisfying when it's like someone is so restricted in something like eating. So usually people are pretty cranky, and understandably, to start, because they're hungry, they're frustrated, they're in pain. And then it's really nice to see the gradual progression over time. It's like, oh, I can get a spoon in my mouth. And then it's like, oh my gosh, I just ate a hamburger. And that's where it gets really satisfying, because they went from just a curmudgeon, understandably, again, to just like loving the situation they're in and just so happy that they can eat whatever they want to eat again.
And I think the beauty of what you do, and I guess other physical therapists as well, it's all natural though, because again, what you do, it's not medicine based. It's all, I guess, the body based or the jaw based.
Right. So it's all trying to use the body to help heal and sort of take care of itself. That's really what the goal is, trying to use yourself to make yourself feel better.
Describe the process that if somebody knew they were having a jaw problem, and I guess some people really know they have a problem, where it's just uncomfortable or painful, and they make an appointment. You do, describe what happens. You do an initial evaluation, and then you set up a program, and talk about how long it takes.
So the initial session, I usually take, depending on the person's situation, an hour to 90 minutes to really understand everything from their low back up, because it all can start to play a role in how their jaw is moving or whatever their issue, whether it's like headaches or neck pain. I really want to get a full scope of like just how they're moving, or what muscles are, how the muscles are doing, how the joints are moving. And from there, as we go along, we start to establish a plan, whether what's going to need hands-on work to try to improve the mobility of certain areas or get them certain muscles to calm down, and sort of game plan along that what kind of exercises will be needed to retrain whatever muscles need to be retrained. So everybody's a little different in terms of the timeline. The more chronic the situation, typically takes a little bit longer to come out of it. I think my goal is that every session somebody sees some sort of change, whether it's, if we're talking about the jaw, whether they can move it a little bit easier, whether it's a little bit less painful. But typically I'd hope to see people in a much better situation between like 5 and 10 visits at the most, along the way there.
Okay, and a visit with you then, you have an office there? Is that where you are now?
So I do not have an office at this point. I am doing more of a mobile kind of practice.
Which is great. Yeah.
So I think with COVID going on, people are a little reluctant going out, of course, and trying to avoid crowds. So I thought it might be in the best interest to go to people's homes. They feel safe there.
It's
It's
a great
only
concept.
one
Yeah.
person going to them, and I take all precautions and trying to make sure that it's just a safe environment. And a lot of people, we work outside just to try and make it as safe as possible for them.
Now, how long is a session typically?
It's usually about an hour long.
Okay. And so you've been doing this, you started the jaw aspect of this, the jaw therapist. You've been doing this how long?
So I've been the actual business part of it and the practice about just a couple months now.
Okay.
But I've been
Wow.
working with people with jaw related issues for 6 years.
That's some timing to start this in
Oh,
right in the middle of COVID.
that was perfect.
It just worked out. But no, it seems it's a very unique practice. We have a same thing too. A veterinarian comes to the house, which we love, So you actually come to people's homes, which is great. How is it also starting a business? In other words, that you've been trained as a physical therapist. I guess you have a learning curve in terms of the starting business. Was that kind of something you had to get a hold of?
I didn't really have any background knowledge on starting a business. So I've just been reading and watching videos and just like trying to absorb from peers that have done it, just not even just physical therapists, but just in other walks of life, of just trying to suck in as much information as possible on how to do this. So it's definitely been that's been a big challenge. The treatment part and the practice part and working with people, it's like, got it. I feel great. I'm ready to do it. So the business side's definitely been more of a challenge, but I think it's fun to learn about, and it's nice to get a hold of something different.
Now, we're mentioning one of the things I think is cool about what you do. You kind of specialize as the jaw therapist. Do you work with people though with other kinds of physical therapy problems?
Yeah. So as I talked about a little bit before, that the jaw is part of a whole relationship of neck pain, shoulders, the back. So with that, it sort of couples into other issues as well, where somebody might come in. It's like, yeah, they have a little bit of an issue with their jaw or they have a headaches, but it's like, okay, what's going on here is that their shoulder is not moving well, and they're really compensating through their neck or through their back, trying to move their shoulder. So it can be just an aspect of treating somebody's shoulder to really mitigate these other types of issues. And once I'm established and working with someone, I've had a few people that have been like, I really like working with you. Can you help me with my heel pain? It's like, yeah, definitely. I've done it. I've been working as a physical therapist for 6 to 7 years now. So it's like, I'm ready to, I know about these other areas as well. And I'm more than happy to work with people with those issues.
If somebody's experiencing jaw pain, again, aside from seeing you or before they see you for the first time, what can somebody do to avoid jaw pain, or can you avoid it?
Yeah, so we talked just a bit about how it's a lot of little things that add up over time. So it comes down often to just like little habits. So for instance, a lot of people, they like to chew on things that they probably shouldn't. So if people munch on ice, they'll chew on pens or fingernails, or they might chew on gum for very long periods of time, rather than just chewing it for like 10 minutes and getting rid of it. People might chew just on one side of their mouth rather than both sides. That's another thing that can sort of lead to these types of issues over time. And I think a big thing that we see a lot is it's a lot of posture related issues, that people spend a lot of time on their computer. And I think especially now with COVID, having sent a lot of people home and working telecommuting, that's been a bigger issue. Just spending tons of time in front of the computer, that can start to over time lead to jaw related issues.
You mentioned gum, for example. I never thought about it, but is that a good or bad thing to be chewing?
It's
for joint
fine.
health?
It's fine. I think it starts to become an issue when people start chewing on a piece of gum for like 20, 30 minutes and they're just chomping. There's no flavor left. It's just like coming into this like rock in their mouth and they're just munching away. I think that becomes more of the issue than having a piece of gum.
How about stuff that people shouldn't be eating with respect to not like more so with jaw health? Are there any type of things that, like you mentioned, ice, for example, not a great idea to be chomping on ice?
Yeah, it's probably not the best idea. I don't want people to think that if they chew on a piece of ice that they're going to have issues with their jaw, because that's not true. It's usually just a long-term accumulation of little issues like that. Like if you're chewing on a piece of ice all day, like people just, I'm sure you've seen people that just munch on ice all day. If they keep chewing on, say, the right side of their mouth all day, every day, it's like, yeah, they're probably going to end up with some sort of issue. But if it's something that's like, it's a hot summer day, you decide, I'm going to get a glass of water with some ice and I'm going to chew on it, they're probably not going to have an issue. So I don't want to deter anybody from just living their life.
What about hard candy? In terms of not so much sucking hard candy, but just chomping on it.
Yeah, I mean, it's another like ice. I think that could lead into that kind of issue. I think with hard candy and ice, you're just also more likely to damage your teeth, and which can just be a whole other issue in itself versus the jaw. But like some candies, like now and laters, I don't know if you've had a now and later before, but it's like a taffy, but it's essentially just like a solid thing that try and chew, and I think that'll just like rip your teeth out and just destroy your
it used to be Bonomo's taffy. There was a product called Bonomo's taffy, and I could just see it. You know, it's like I said, ripping your teeth out. Dentists probably love it. What about something else too? You hear about it, and just as we're talking, I never thought much about it, but athletes, for example, sometimes get a broken jaw. You know, what constitutes a broken jaw?
So that's probably just a break to the bone itself at the jaw, and it can happen in different areas. It could happen like lower or upper, like towards the joint, but that would probably entail, depending on the situation. I mean, that's not my area so much,
Sure.
But they probably have their jaw wired shut, depending on the situation, to allow for it to heal. And then afterwards, I think that's where I would come in, is if they haven't moved their mouth and however long they've been in that situation, or they haven't chewed or opened their mouth to the full extent for a long period of time, I could come in and help teach those muscles and teach that person how to do those things again.
So, but back to the concept then. So, broken jaw, that's I guess a bone then, but there's muscles there, or
so the jaw itself, like it starts, we talked about where the joints start in front of your ears, and it's just one single bone that comes down and forms like your jawline and your chin, where your bottom teeth are attached. So it's somewhere along that line there that people typically would have a break in the bone.
and so I guess the recommendation, again, you're not a jaw surgeon, the recommendation is to not do too much boxing. It is not going to be helpful to the jaw health.
That's definitely not going to be helpful for the jaw.
If somebody wants to get in touch with you in terms of finding out more about you, what's the best bet?
I think that going to my website, thejawtherapist.com.
I love it.
Yeah,
Okay.
I think just by emailing me, messaging me, or sending or calling, I think that is just the best way. Fine getting messages anyway. I'll respond pretty quick. And that's thejawtherapist.com.
Are you also on Facebook?
Yes.
Okay. And again, I've spoken to you outside the show, and I appreciate your working with me. So if you want to get in touch one last time, it's Brad, Basch. Is that the spelling of it?
Yes.
And the website again?
thejawtherapist.com.
Okay. I'd like to thank you, Brad, for being my guest this second half hour on BLAINESWORLD show. Also to Alan Muscat, my guest, the first half. I'd also like to thank Amy Prisnash, my producer. Look forward to having you join me next Wednesday, 9 a.m. here on WPVM LP in Asheville, North Carolina. You can also listen online at WPVMFM.org, and you can also catch us on WPVM's Facebook page. Hopefully, Alan, Brad, at some point in time, I'll even get to meet you. I look forward to it.
Yeah, me as well. Thanks for having
Okay,
me.
thanks very much. Speak to you soon. Be well.